Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Tang. I'm really pleased to be here to lead the keynote panel of this really fantastic group for the Risk Hong Kong 2020 session today. We have a wonderful panel, including heads of compliance as well as heads of tech risk, and so really requires this blending of different folk within financial institutions, both traditional as well as the rising fintechs, to better understand the emerging risks that we are addressing, but also using the emerging technologies. We please welcome Aveline Sun, old friend from Citibank. She's now risen to the role of head of compliance for Asia Pacific and Citi. Debbie, who's from my old shop as well, Credit Suisse. Debbie now is the Chief Compliance Officer for one of our emerging virtual banks, Ping An One Connect. And then fascinatingly, also we have Stephen Falk from Levy Bank, another of our emerging virtual banks, but specifically from a tech risk perspective. And that's so important as we talk about RegTech. So I'm the co-chair amongst my various roles of the RegTech committee of the FinTech Association, and so we work with industry players to kind of grow the space. And so we, in terms of, I had a series of questions to pose to this great panel, and look forward to their sharings and mutual learnings. So maybe let's start off with RegTech use cases and pain points. So as we all know, there's so many issues that are being faced by the financial industry, and the regulators are increasingly encouraging the use of RegTech. But what really are being used and focused on in the different financial institutions? Maybe let's start with you, Aveline.
Thank you, Brian, and indeed, it's my pleasure to join this very exciting panel, old and new friends. RegTech is a topic of such debates and discussions over the last few years. And every time I meet up with other chief compliance officers who will be trying to probe into what you're doing, something that we can perhaps explore together, who is a good vendor out there. So I think the market's interest has been increasing, particularly after COVID as well. I think there's a realization of how much technology we need to use to be more agilely detecting, preventing all sort of misconduct. So far, based on what we've understood from the industry, as we frequently discuss in the associations as well as just bilaterally, I think most banks and financial institutions have started looking at or deployed market conduct and surveillance type of tools. They're also quite interested in data leakage prevention. So where it comes to data protection, data security, that's also quite a popular area to use. And then personal account dealing, personal trading, employee conduct, the use again of detective and review monitoring tools, that's also been quite high up on people's agenda. Customer protection, when it comes to using tools to look at marketing materials, using of NLP, natural language processing tools, the usage of assisted or augmented technology to help detect any issues with the very voluminous marketing materials, see whether there were suitability issues. That's also getting more popular. Data, how do they gather the different data in a big bank or a big firm and then make sense of it in terms of analytics to be much more predictive, to look at trade data, to look at people's employee data, to detect if there were strains in particular areas, to prevent conduct risk from arising, or to look at behavioral outliers. I think that's also another quite interesting topic, just to name a few.
Fantastic, Aveline. So as you've indicated, RegTech is a whole penumbra. So when people talk about fintech, there's so many aspects, but RegTech, there are lots of them as well. So are there any particular ones that you are currently kind of spending more time on rather than less? It sounds like conduct risk seems to be prevalent. So a few years ago, it was KYC AML, but it sounds like it's now shifted to conduct risk. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair statement. I think in terms of AML, KYC, that's probably the first area where most banks were interested in a number of years ago. And I think most banks by now have already deployed many different levels of technological tools, RegTechs. But in terms of conduct risk, it is developing because I think many institutions are still struggling with metrics, are still trying to measure correctly and to monitor the changes in the conduct risk profile of the institution. So that's certainly an area rising. Another quite interesting area that I myself would be quite involved in at the moment is relating to regulatory change tracking. Again, this is not a new area. Many banks have already deployed worked with vendors who provide regulatory change feeders or analytical tools to automate impact analysis, automate notification, automate matching against policy processes and controls. And some are quite impressive. Some have difficulties with languages because in Asia we are not, singular language region. We do have many countries where regulatory languages are also very diverse. So I think that's also one challenge.
Fantastic. Thanks, Aveline. Now turning over to you, Debbie. So you've come from more traditional financial institution into a brand new institution, so less legacy, purely online. Ping An is, of course, financial institution more on the insurance side, but, One Connect is really then, technology based. So what are you seeing in terms of the pain points as a new financial player, a new fintech, and growing the RegTech, and what are you focusing on?
Thanks, Brian. Rather than pain points, I would see these as very interesting challenges, and I really feel passionate about them. And for virtual banks, I can share from three perspectives because I think these are quite common use of RegTech tools. First, still AML KYC is because virtual banks don't have physical branches, so the app is very important to onboard a client remotely. This requires the adoption of eKYC. eKYC would have the artificial intelligence and machine learning back in it. And for this, it's very important to design the experience in a way is really a smooth customer journey with a client-friendly user interface and a client experience. So this is the first point that remote monitoring and holistic reviews, holistic monitoring. Take an example, why this is important. For traditional banks, there may be pain points with a lot of different systems developed 10 or 20 years ago. They may have a different format of data, but for virtual banks, we can come from scratch and design the data architecture from the beginning. This helps. And with the more structured data, it helps us to visualize, for example, the relationship of different parties. For example, what would be the key happenings in certain areas. So for these, RegTech can also help the holistic reviews using data visualization and data analytics. And the third one is on the modeling with the data, and better still, if there can be data from a client's perspective along the line of the ecosystem. This helps to understand. And where it comes to the lending decision, I think people already see quite a number of initiatives in the market in Hong Kong and also overseas that clients or even including companies don't need to submit a whole bunch of documents for applying credit lines, but there can be models which help extremely quick lending decision. So these are three aspects I would like to share from a virtual bank perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Debbie. And again, the big difference with virtual banks and fintechs, you have tech in your DNA. So you start with that and you don't have legacy. So you're really building upon that. So maybe now turning on to, this sounds great. It sounds wonderful. AI, we just haven't mentioned blockchain so far, but, so far all the buzzwords are there, right? And it is very exciting. But now comes adoption, right? So maybe but adoption is not as easy as one would think, right? So I remember when I first left bank and went into fintech and the like, I suddenly realized how long the procurement process is, right? How difficult it is to actually convince the banks to use new technologies. And this was like a few years ago now. Fast forward, I think things have changed quite a bit. You know, maybe I'll switch it back to you first, Aveline. You know, so Debbie was a bit provocative about, yes, the legacy systems that you have to face, but you know, maybe you can speak a little bit about some of the challenges that are for adoption that you face within the bank, and potentially how you address those.
Sure, I didn't find Debbie provocative, by the way.
I meant in a friendly way, in a very friendly way.
Sure, sure. The challenges are different, I think, for banks who have the history of, yes, legacy systems, where actually making sense of the data being so voluminous, and making sure you have clean data to use is a challenge that perhaps the virtual banks do not see as much. However, I think most banks are investing quite significant amounts of efforts and resources to do such data cleanup. And what the consultants have been telling me, some other banks have spent $600 million in order to build a data lake, in order for them to use the data much more proactively, so that it can assist not only from a compliance perspective, but rather the business client servicing perspective. So that is something of much focus for a lot of the banks. But internal challenges, there could be many as well, where the banks are much more multi-products and business lines may be quite segregated or fragmented. Some of the business use case becomes less obvious, and in order to get the buy-in for significant platform changes, infrastructural changes, would require much more efforts to get the buy-in from all of the verticals. And so people who have worked in international banks would frequently face that challenge of getting a business case through to deploy something quite new, untested, benefits unclear, and of course, if successful, would bring significant benefits to the bank. But having the appetite to run the sandboxes, having the appetite to go for trial and error, I think many banks are still in the learning phase.
Thanks, Aveline. And another challenge, I think, with our functionality is RegTech is, you know, there's not a top line issue, right? It's a bottom line. It's a saving costs proposition as opposed to more revenue. Although that with KYC, AML, and onboarding, that becomes a selling point, actually, so both from the private banking side as well as for the virtual banks.
I totally agree. Just to add that, from experience, really, if the business case can be shaped much more with a client angle, much more with how this can positively impact a client outcome, client experience, that's a much stronger chance of its success.
That's why Debbie's talking about CX and UX already, right? And you know, and again, in private banks, that's the same thing as well, right? So fantastic. So now turning over to Stephen, one of the reasons I'm really excited to have you on is whenever I spoke on compliance events and risk events for the past few years, in a real environment, I'd ask the question, so how many of you have actually spoken to your IT and risk, you know, in the last 12 months? And there would be not very many hands up, right? I think increasingly, hopefully that is changing. So we're really pleased to have risk and risk ops and your perspective from a tech risk point of view here, Stephen. So what is your perspective on this, on adoption? Again, you know, coming from a tech point of view, but also, you know, people are talking about AI and the like, and algorithms and models. How do you assess this from a tech risk point of view?
Thank you, Ban. Yeah, I think you're true that in traditional banking or in past banking industries, a lot of people always think that technology is quite different from compliance. Or in my old times working as an IT guy, actually we feel that compliance or risk is our enemy, because they are telling me that we can't do such things, and we just tell them that we need to do such things. So this is quite a new era right now, because maybe unluckily we have the COVID-19, but actually generate a new era that like we are using technologies for conference right now. Also, we have virtual bank, work from home, also like that. And as a virtual bank, we actually heavily rely on WebCat because one of the things you mentioned before that is the cost saving. Yeah, our how to say it, the main point to compete with the traditional bank is we need to heavily use technology to reduce the cost as a startup and also as a virtual bank. But at the same time, the adoption also is a challenge to us because besides of the customer expectation, also the governance bodies also expect virtual bank will use a lot of technology. That means they expect us to put a lot of investment on like WebTech or other technologies. For example, we use just like we mentioned before, we use EKYC for our onboarding and AML tools, a lot of other tools like for risk management and also things like that, credit risk management. And one thing is that because it's a trend to using AI, it seems if you're not talking about AI, no one care about what you are doing right now. But AI to me, of course, I don't talk too much technical things because we talk about AI. Also, machine learning is actually two different things. I think some of the guys that interest in technology, you know the difference. But the main problem here is different countries have different regulations and their requirements on how to handle customer data, how to handle processing of customer data and big data and also things like that. And AI and machine learning and plus cloud, why I mention cloud, because a lot of AI machine learning actually based on big data. How you get the big data is you put all the data in a big cloud and everybody can access it. And that's always a contradiction with the regulators because, for example, from Hong Kong MA, they are very concerned about you put customer data in the cloud environment, which is maybe the data stored outside Hong Kong. That is a big issue that actually I think all the petitioners within Hong Kong know that we keep discussing with Hong Kong for quite a few years already. And this is still a challenge and struggling in Hong Kong banking industry right now. I can say that because honestly, if you don't have enough data for the AI and machine learning to learn, actually AI is useless. Honestly, that's true. To be honest, to say that even EKYC, or down to a more simple OCR, recognize the characters, actually it's actually a learning process for the tools. If you don't have enough, like I just, for example, I give them 10 characters or 10 Ks to learn, I can say that you will have 90% error from the OCR. So that is a struggling how to adopt the technology and on the same time to comply with the regulators, especially where the data put there and how you explain to the regulators how the data can be manipulated, because AI is not an easy way to explain in the layman terms. Yeah, that's why I think it is still a way that still an area that we need to explore in technology, especially in technology part. And another thing about adopting WebTech in I think at least in Hong Kong is actually besides of talking about tools, AI, blockchain, all the fancy words, we actually I think some people are also aware that we are always talking about open API. Yeah, open API is actually also a WebTech. Why I say that? Because, for example, we can use open API to share some of the onboarding data so that I don't need the customer if they come to Leafy Bank. For example, we have cooperation with like Aveline Citibank or with PLB together. We can share some of the information under the regulatory's concern, of course, and we don't need to ask the customer to do the clumsy onboarding process again. So RegTech not only talking about a fancy or fancy tools, but how to use the technology to improve or improve the CX customer experience on all the whole banking experience on that end, also on the regulatory compliance side. Yeah, that's much it.
No, thank you very much. And again, when you're talking about open APIs, it reminds me of the discussion for the past few years about KYC utilities. But what I will share with you is this: as you know, the technology is not difficult. It's the economics and getting the stakeholders to agree to that. That's the difficult part. And we can go into a separate discussion on that one. But you know, so thanks so much for that sharing. And I think you hit upon the next area that we wanted to chat about, which is, you know, governance, right? So internally, you know, I actually do a lot of work in AI governance. So but more generally speaking, you know, how do with these new technologies, which are machine learning, NLP, right, blockchain, you know, data privacy is increasingly important in so many different jurisdictions, right? So how do we get and then I joked that, you know, with RegTech, it's different from most other tech vendors. With most tech vendors, you know, the tech vendor has to sell it to the enterprise, and the enterprise says yes, it's worth it, they will get it. One of the first questions that the customer will say, so what does the regulator think, right? So it's almost, you know, the regulator is a very important third party in relation to this. So in terms of, you know, internal governance, maybe some of you can shed a bit of light in relation to how you get, you know, comfortable with respect to the onboarding of some of these RegTechs. Debbie, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. First of all, I feel HKMA has been very proactive in helping virtual banks to do well. They set a very good framework so that virtual banks can also do step by step to ensure robust. For example, there's a need to conduct independent assessment on a few areas, including technology risks, including cyber risks, and fraud risk management, AML controls, as well as consumer protection. So with all these, it really helped with independent assessment by experts. Not just that virtual banks have an extra fresh pair of eyes, but also it helped to project more confidence for our clients or potential clients. That helps. And secondly, how to get ourselves more comfortable. I think, Brian, you also mentioned already, do we speak closely? Do we interact closely with IT? Obviously, in a virtual bank, it's not just on a daily basis, sometimes days and nights. Very frequent and close touch. And even when I work for traditional banks, there was already also, it's less frequent, but not too infrequent interaction as well. So the key is really to get close to them and be involved earlier. Compliance being a function or second line of defense can't really hide behind the scene. We need to be proactive and involve early in the design phase. I think this helps because if you know more, you would be more confident to ask questions or to provide constructive challenge. This helps to ensure effective governance. Similarly, for senior management, it can't be just too high level. They need to keep up with the industry requirements and trends as well. Other than that, think about, I think Stephen mentioned about cloud. It is an example of a third-party vendor or third-party service provider that we need to pay attention to and exercise very close due diligence. So it's not just ourselves, to also make sure our key vendors, key third-party service provider also provides reliable services, you know, to make sure we are comfortable, regulators are comfortable, as well as clients. Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So Stephen, what about you? Again, you know, with senior manager regimes going around, and as Debbie said, you know, parties need to be aware and understand what is increasingly under the hood. So how are you interacting? And again, it's, you know, both of you are now at VBs, which is a different dynamic. You know, you are tech by definition. So maybe if you can share a little bit both in terms of your current role and in the past, how these interactions have gone and how the audience can benefit from this. And then actually, by the way, I should have mentioned this at the very beginning. Audience, please send in your questions. We will be allocating a little bit of time for Q&A. Type it into the chat room, and I'll be curating a couple of questions for our fantastic panel here. Stephen, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, I think as I just mentioned before, the era is changing right now. From the virtual bank perspective, quite similar to the BSI. So I may not mention from my bank situation actually, because we are virtual bank. We actually quite, how to say, the risk team is working closely with the technology team. I actually sit beside the IT team, unlike the old times that the risk team may be in some area, the IT team's already in the back office, that's somewhere in the new territories or something like that. But maybe I can mention a bit when I back in my time in Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan changed that 10 years ago or something like that. During the time, actually, yes, that's true that the cooperations between the risk team and technology team is not quite common. Especially, I think probably all the risk practitioners may understand that even a few years ago, technology risk management is still under operation risk management. So in the past that we don't have a TRM team here. We always only a sub-team under the operation risk management. So you can see that in the past that technology risk or compliance to the whole banking industry or even financial service industry is still not that important to compare. And maybe not quite good to use these words, but thank you for this actively cybersecurity incidents. And also with the new technology involved with starting people to get used to work from home and also things like that, that making technology become very common even for those staff that in the past that they don't quite much work with technology. Okay, so people right now start to, how to say, more willing to accept technologies and more understanding that technology risk or compliance, or I would like to say that the compliance that using technology is part of the operation of the bank. So people can start to use that. For example, if you're working at a bank, you already get used that you will have a security awareness training every year. Okay, they talk about how you to comply to the regulatory requirement, also reminding how you handling phishing email, also things like that is all related to that technology. I don't think anyone right now is still writing letters or memo to your office because you're using email and also things like that. And the compliance in the technology side, how to protect customer data when you're using email, using a technology is where it's in the blood in every staff in the banking right now. So that is also giving us from practitioner from IT side is easier from the past because we don't need to try to explain why we can't do that. We can do that in technology terms to the risk department, and all the risk department, the staff don't need to also in vice versa need to explain half 30 minutes to us why you need to do that control in the IT system. So both sides benefit from right now in due to the changing era, but there's still some gap. Like honestly, like we mentioned about the AI, machine learning, also things like that. I can still say that there are a lot of people thinking technology is a magic wand. So you flick the wand and everything will boom, suddenly appear. Talking about like AI, sometimes in the past, some people ask me that if I use AI, do I mean that I can cut the headcount of 50% because the AI can do those things like that? I think all the people don't want to hear that except the boss. But they will think that, okay, because I heard from something from conferencing, AI is so powerful. Why I can't do that? Why I can't use AI to handle all the compliance things that I just mentioned, all the compliance checking or also things like that. So I don't need a risk department here anymore. And the good thing is that I don't have human error. Supposedly, yeah, because people may have human error, even compliance team may have error or something like that. But we need to know that technology is not something that godlike things, I would like to say. Technology actually is built from human. Those mean that out of the human's capability, technology can't do that. So we actually need to, in the compliance world, we actually, or risk world, we actually need to know that technology is always a tool that help us, but not to replace or dominate or change something that we are doing right now. So that will, I always use this term to communicate with our management and other staff that we actually have tools to help us, but don't think that the tools can replace or even can make decisions for us. Because if an AI can make decisions, first we need to teach them. Who teach them? People. Yeah.
So augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, right? Augments humans. And then no, so I think that's really valuable there. So Aveline, if I can turn briefly to you in relation to this question, because I think most of the audience comes from backgrounds more similar to where you are sitting. These guys are lucky; they sit in BBs. They're all in tech, right? And again, to Stephen's point, tech is AI is statistical; it's not causal. Right, that's the other thing people need to understand. So Aveline, so these days for governance, what's happening? Are there more committees? Are there more Sarbanes-Oxley tick the more people signing up? Right? Are there more external sign-offs? So as Debbie mentioned, I chaired a panel once with the Big Four as well as a cloud company, and increasingly they're looking at these independent assessments to get comfortable, right? And then there's the issue of upskilling too, because to Stephen's point, the big problem with a lot of people in compliance is, oh, I don't know this, and then is the technology going to replace me, and what skills am I going to have, right? So love to hear your thoughts there.
Oh, those are a lot of questions you have just fired away, but all very valid. Taking, for example, the Big Fours, the consultants, obviously big businesses for them to do those independent assessments. There are so many firms and banks adopting those initiatives that require this comfort level to demonstrate to their management as well as to the regulators. And the education bit is very true as well. It doesn't only go with the internal folks, but also externally to bridge that gap with regulators to understand what those initiatives are. And therefore, the compliance officers who deal with the regulators need to be equipped with that language. They need to understand what the technology is about. And so that upskilling certainly very much on many's agenda. My own experience was that, first of all, many years ago, we were trying to calm the troops that technology is not actually going to replace you. It's not going to, your job won't be replaced by a robot, right? So that image many years ago was in people's head. Over the last few years, I think many in the industry gotten comfortable. I'm still around. And so it is more about progressing in your job. You do need that skill set to understand what those technology are, what the models are. We won't ever, in a compliance professional trained, I guess, quick enough to think like a technology expert. So we will always need to partner, but at least to be understanding whether that would pose any regulatory risk, and to translate that towards the regulatory arena to get the necessary buy-in, risk assessments, and approvals. And we have seen problems. We have seen, and we often talk about the explainability barrier. Our management can't articulate what those switches are, and in the kind of the black box risk that Stephen spoke very much about just now. But over the last few years, I do think with internal governance, hiring of the right people into compliance as well. We have to go hire experts who had the IT background, and to then cross-pollinate and to educate more the other officers as well in the industry, with the help of also the consultants and industry associations with much more education efforts. I do see that upskilling happening, but yes, more work to do in that front.
Oh, I totally hear you, which is one reason why I joined Hong Kong U, and I'm leading the Light Lab, so Law, Innovation, Technology, Entrepreneurship, right? Because I think that it's not just the next generation, but the current generation and the upskilling that's so important. So we have a question from the floor here, which I thought I'd throw in, and it was in relation to evolution and sophistication of tech risk, and how do we ensure effective monitoring and reporting. So I think maybe to interpret that question, it's around, yes, the technology seems to be there, but maybe it's about the skill sets, right, around using that technology and interpreting that technology. So one of the things one of the big debates, as some of you would know, is, coding for lawyers, right? You need to teach compliance people or lawyers to code. And I agree with what you said. It's about the language. You need to understand the language to discuss it on a layperson's terms. And right now, I'm working on the IOSCO consultation on AI governance. So I'm thinking a lot about that, and we'll be making submissions there too. So do any of you like to speak to this question about ensuring effective monitoring and reporting in light of these new technologies? I think to interpret the question is, how do we get compliance folk to better use these technologies, and what's the adoption rate? So any advice there, please?
Maybe I can chip in some my experience. I think one thing that, as I just mentioned before, that technology is actually a tool. So wherever maybe like a vendor or porter say that they can provide such things, so fancy things and all sort of type of report, AI learning and all the process checking. The first thing is that actually I think the company need to know what they need to do first. This is very important. Remember, the technology is tools. So in other words, like I have some experience, some company before buy a very sophisticated tools that can do thousands of things, sound very fancy and crazy. But at the end is that the company use that tools for 2 years and then throw it away. Why? Because actually you need to set thousands or even more rules set into that tools in order to make it work in your company. And those rules or settings actually come from your risk and compliance team. So the first thing is that if you talk about back to the question, how do we ensure effective monitoring and reporting? Is the first thing is that we need to have a very clear objective why we need that part. For example, some of the web tech tools is very good because it can replace some day repeating work that is worthless for people to doing that, because we are not robot. We don't need to hire someone that do typing 7 times 24 all days long, because it's not worth to do that. But in some case, some tools actually just can help to make up in certain part. So from the beginning, if we use technology, we need to know the first thing is that, well, which part or what objective we want to adopt such technology or such tools in that. And once you have the objective, actually maybe a little bit tricky to answer this question, but when you know the objective, you will know how to effective monitoring, reporting, and even use the tools.
And I totally agree. I think where people feel most pain in their processes is that would be a good candidate to start to look at opportunities for deployment of technology and automation. So taking a few examples that we have seen, actually they came out of design thinking workshops. So it's a very common thing, I guess, people do get the, I guess, troops on the ground to look through what are the processes they're spending too much time on, they're repetitive, or they're not finding results from the monitoring. They've been monitoring day in, day out, but hardly they got any true hits, but loads of false alerts. And they may then need to take a step back and say, hey, this is a good candidate for us to use RegTech, and maybe we will do a pilot and see what happens. And often case, then we find really good finds, and everyone got excited, and those get the buy-in for project launch. So yes, I think that bottom-up pain point finding is quite effective.
So Aveline, who leads that in your experience? Is it the bank's innovation team? Is it the now legal or compliance ops team? Who leads design thinking? I teach design thinking in my law school. Can you believe it? Right. So so who leads it there in a bank, for example?
It's a mixture. In my old shop, there would be a dedicated innovation group of people. But here it's very where I am now is very embedded into each business units. So the model differs.
Fantastic. Now we're getting towards the end of the hour, so to speak, and I wanted to give you all a magic wand in a sense. So if you had a magic wand and there was something on your wish list to kind of grow the ecosystem, right? So there are challenges because of the nature of RegTech. So if you could wave your magic wand, what is it that you would make suggestions to improve to the regulators, to the financial industry ecosystem, to actually improve adoption of RegTech? Maybe start with you, Debbie.
Sure. With the adoption of RegTech, I hope everyone will have a positive attitude and have an open mind. Even where there may be teething issue, just try to think about how to respond and how to do better. Thank you.
Great, Stephen.
Yes, thank you. I think my wishes, my wish is same as Debbie. Yeah. So because without a cooperation between each other, technology is useless, honestly. So if I have the money around, I also wish that the people will be more open-minded, willing to share their ideas and willing to accept new ideas.
Great. And so these are people both within a company, but also, shall we say, the regulators and or maybe the front office is what you mean, so that they approve the budget, right? That's what you mean, right? Aveline.
Along the same line, I think allowing for the trial and error is a journey to get to the right place. And the more public-private partnership we can have with the regulators, that would be much more welcome. I think in APAC, some jurisdictions are doing very well in that, like Singapore, actually giving out grants and subsidies and then supporting a lot of those RegTech's growth, so that the vendor actually get a chance to work with the banks and financial institutions more closely to understand the user requirements better, and likewise for the banks to articulate better what is needed in the industry. That will also promote the growth. So fingers crossed coming our way.
Yes, no, I agree. And that's something I had proposed when, as a lot of you would know, the MES has engaged a Big Four to write a white paper. And when they interviewed me, I had suggested some of those funding possibilities, because ultimately, even it's an interesting sell. Some of the banks are quite big and rich, but it's actually not that easy to get the budget. So if you can say there's some government money that goes into it, and it just makes it easier for that adoption rate, I think. So that's something that I certainly have proposed. And then trying to see one of my phrases, I see RegTech as the secret sauce, right? So it helps big financial institutions, it helps fintechs, it helps the digital asset space, right? And it's all, so it's right across, and it's to address the, fight financial crime, right? So I think we're all doing hopefully good things here. And so some of the things to address some of your concerns, Aveline, is, so we are actually preparing a RegTech ecosystem map for Hong Kong and beyond. So hopefully that will be starting the journey, and every time, hopefully it will grow. And then we're actually developing that into an anatomy so that we can actually find the solutions. As you know, a lot of the solution providers are either point solutions. So where exactly do they fit into your scheme? But some of them are platforms. Everybody likes to be a platform now. But then, do you have to buy the whole platform? And how does that fit with the spaghetti back? So we're looking at that. And then we're also, for FinTech Week that's coming up at the beginning of November, we're doing a World RegTech Summit. So we'd love to, involve you and the audience in relation to that as we present RegTechs and like again. So as we finish up, I'm told time's up now. So please put your virtual hands together and thank this wonderful panel for their insights. And hopefully all of you will heed their wish lists, and we will all have a positive outlook and in terms of adopting these new technologies, but in a responsible way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.